We're doing a few things, NASA, today. The moon landing, the Mars rover, and then a non-NASA but more military, Bob Lazar. Go to the comments section and vote for next week. Scientology, Joel Osteen, Bill Gates. And now back to this video. We're going to have to do another All Things NASA video to get everything done. Probably 3-4 videos to get everything done. But this will be a good start. Remember to go check out Patreon, and let's get started. This is Neil Armstrong answering the question on being low on fuel and the landing zone for the moon landing. And he goes first, and then Buzz Aldrin goes second. And I'm going to explain to you what I'm seeing.
Well, and the second part of it, I suppose, for Buzz is, out of your experience, how tough do you think pinpoint precision landings will be on the lunar surface on future flights?
Okay, yes, we were concerned about running low on fuel, and the range extension that we did to avoid the boulder field and craters, we used up a significant percentage of our fuel margins, and we were quite close to our legal limit.
But first off, his body's in agreement with him as he's talking to this reporter and answering the question. And he gave a very generic, layman's term answer. Now listen to Buzz.
Will be based on your experience.
Well, I think it requires some very pinpoint determination of the orbit that the vehicle is in before it begins powered descent, and this requires extreme care in making sure that the ground tracking, because the entire descent is based upon the knowledge that the ground...
And you see how uncomfortable Armstrong is becoming, wiggling in his seat. And he's not wiggling like center wiggle. He did a wiggle, and he wiggled that way, away from Buzz.
Ground has and puts into the onboard computer of exactly where the spacecraft is. And this starts several revolutions before and then is carried ahead.
Now both of them are playing with their pens or pencil, whatever they had.
As the computer keeps track of its position. So during sequences like undocking, we have to be extremely careful that we do not disturb this knowledge of exactly where it is, because this then relates in the computer bringing the LEM down to a different spot than everyone thought we were coming into. This is what defines the error ellipse.
That little move by Armstrong.
Where we might possibly land having targeted for the center. Now, the ability to be able to control where you are requires that you be able to identify features. And of course, in our particular landing site, this was selected to be as void of significant features as possible, to give us as smooth a terrain. Now, in any area...
And you notice how wiggly Armstrong is. He can't sit still during the answer, and he is shifting, moving his hands, collapsing, uncollapsing, picking up the pencil, putting the pencil down, touching his forehead.
Area like this, there are always certain identifying features that you can come out, certain patterns of craters. And to the extent that this can be used, if the crew sees that they are not going exactly toward the pre-planned point, they can begin to tell the computer to move to a slightly different landing location. Now this can occur up in the region of 5,000 to 6,000.
And Buzz keeps looking at Armstrong. This is the second time he's looked at Armstrong.
Feet. Then as Neil took over control of our spacecraft to extend the range, to get beyond this large crater at West Crater, this again may be required if identification is made in the vicinity of 300, 400, 500 feet to be able to maneuver that last in the vicinity of 1,000 to 2,000 feet to make a pinpoint landing. But so much depends on the early trajectory, the ability to then redesignate, and the final manual control.
Now, if you didn't catch what he just said, because he spouted out a bunch of scientific jargon, in the beginning, he was talking about his flight. Because one person didn't fly the entire time. They had missions. Your mission is to become oriented to landing. Your mission is to land. Well, Buzz's mission was to orient to landing, and Armstrong's mission was to land. Now, Armstrong gave his answer, and it was fairly short and very layman. Buzz gives his answer, and he made it extremely detailed. He tried to make it layman, but it was very, very detailed. And then he gets to Armstrong's point where he took over, and it was extremely short, as if, extremely simple. And judging by just the reaction of Armstrong and his little I can't remember this poor guy's name, and it's so sad because he was such a big part of history. If you don't believe the moon landing, at least believe the tension that is going on between these two as far as landing on the moon. They landed on the moon, and it's like a one-up of who had the better job or more complex job, or who was smarter, or who flew better. Because it seems to be Buzz's take on he did a much better job. He had the harder job. His job was more important. And you could tell that's by all the fidgeting and the moving and the uncomfortable, touching the forehead, frustration, that there is definitely tension between Buzz and Armstrong. And we kept seeing Buzz look at Armstrong in a way that would say, look at to confirm what I'm saying. He's looking at Armstrong to confirm what he's saying about what he's talking about. Now, as far as why there's tension there, if it's because of Buzz or if it's because of Armstrong, it's kind of hard to see, but there is tension there. And a lot of it, apparently. They were just asked the question as far as their experience on the moon.
The first part of your question, the surface did vary in its thickness of penetration. Somewhere in rather flat regions, the footprint would penetrate perhaps a half an inch or sometimes only a quarter of an inch.
And his body is being honest with him. And he's giving emphasis and appropriate words as well. I think that's important. And we go so much on the body sometimes we forget to look at the face. But he's giving good emphasis on the correct words.
Gave a very firm response. In other
And he's accessing memory.
regions near the edges of these craters,
And he accessed experience there too.
we could find that the foot would sink down maybe 2, 3, possibly 4 inches. And in the slope, of course, the various edges of the footprint might go on up to 6 or 7 inches, and compacting this material would tend to produce a slight sideways motion as it was compacted on the material underneath it. So we feel that you cannot always tell just by looking at the terrain what the exact resistance will be as your foot sinks into a point of firm contact. So one must be quite cautious in moving around.
And of course, his body is singing with him as he's answering this question. And he's not only accessing memory, he's accessing the physical of doing it.
Around in this rough terrain.
We were never able to see stars from the lunar surface or on the daylight side of the moon by eye without looking through the optics. I don't recall during the period of time that we were photographing the solar corona what stars we could see.
And his body was singing with him on that one. And we saw a furrow.
That we were photographing the solar corona what stars we could see.
As he's going back into memory. Apparently, in all that they were doing, that was not as important as what he was doing. So looking at stars or what they were seeing wasn't as important as something else that he was focusing on. Which is why he has a hard time in memory on it. And he had the furrowed brow.
I don't remember seeing any.
And of course, it's confirmed by his friend because he caught the cues, because back then people actually paid attention to each other. I don't remember seeing any.
Neil, you were a little bit concerned, you said, about stubbing your toe at the point of landing because the surface was obscured by dust. Do you see any way around that kind of problem for future landings on the moon?
And he was actually accessing the physicality of it too.
Literally.
I think the simulations that we have at the present time to enable a pilot to understanding the problems of a lunar landing, that is, the simulator and the various lunar landing training facilities, and I just see it as a beginning. Not just this flight, but in this program, which has really been a very short piece of human history. An instant in history, the entire program. It's a beginning of a new age.
Beginning of a new age. He tightens that jaw up as if he'd actually really like to say more. The beginning of a new age. They all three of them said something about it, but I found Armstrong's to be much more profound. Buzz tried to be very technical. The other guy, which is so bad and that I don't know his name, tried to be very patriotic. But Armstrong really just noted it for what it was, the beginning of a new age. And he's reflecting.
Neil, how much descent fuel?
This is Bob Lazar, and he is famous for saying that he worked at Area 51 and pretty much putting it on the map. And he is describing in this little clip the facility where he worked. We're going to look at that.
This facility is an area just off the Papoose lake bed, dry lake bed. And it consists of 9 hangars. The hangars have sloped doors on them with a sand texture coating around the opposite end.
He came out of that as soon as it cut back to him. He was looking in visual memory.
End of the hangars, there's the standard entrance where you're dropped off.
And he is a slight mover. Even though this video is poor quality, we can see that his body, especially here, is moving with him.
Off that, go through a security check, and inside there's a small complex. There is some office space. There's several laboratories, the hangars themselves, of course, and a few other places. I didn't have free reign to.
And the entire time he's accessing memory, and his body is just agreeing with him.
Go wherever I wanted to. Everywhere I went to, I was essentially at.
Even in that statement, you would think that that would come off a little false. Somewhere in him would look disingenuous in saying that. And we don't see any of that. We see his body agreeing with his mind and his mouth.
Escorted, so that was really all about that I saw.
Inside the facility, what was the basic layout? Were there underground levels?
I don't think there were any underground levels to it, though there could have been. I don't.
And his body agrees with him on that, but he doesn't know, but so he says that there could have been. And his body still agrees with him.
The craft allegedly came from there. 1 or 2 autopsy photographs I saw dealt with just a small photograph, a bust shot essentially, just head, shoulders, and chest of an alien where the chest was cut open in T fashion and one single organ was removed. The organ itself in the other picture was cut.
Now he's remembering a dissection.
Cut and vivisectioned essentially, showing the different chambers in there. This was totally unrelated to anything I was doing, but from that photo.
And what we see is his body agreeing with his mouth.
This was totally unrelated to anything I was doing, but from that photograph it looked like what you see in UFO lore as the typical gray. So how tall it was from what I could see, I couldn't tell because I only saw a portion of the photograph, but if everything else you see is correct, I would imagine it was 3.5 or 4 feet tall. But there again, all I had to see was a photograph, and I didn't have much to go on. 3.5 or 4 feet tall, but there again, all I had to see was a photo.
He keeps shaking his head no, and he shrugs his shoulders as if he's trying to downplay what he saw.
Photograph, and I didn't have much to go on.
And a little eye roll that goes with that. So he saw a dissection of something.
See was a photograph, and
It's an eye roll. This I would call suspect, just from the shaking it off, trying to downplay it as not as important. It would honestly suggest to me that maybe he saw a dissection of human, something, because his body agreed that it saw pictures of some dissection. What it was would be the question, but he was not asked that. He's going to talk about seeing a flying saucer.
When did you see your first disc?
The first disc I saw, I believe it was the second, or I think it was the third time I was up
And his body's singing with him.
there. Normally the bus pulled around to the opposite end of the facility, which was the main entrance, and that's
And he's been accessing memory.
where we went in. On this particular occasion, it pulled up to one of the hangar doors, which were normally closed, and the last one was open. We came out, and I saw the disc in the hangar. Upon seeing it, it struck me that, well, this explains all the UFO sightings. Not thinking that it was an extraterrestrial craft, that this must have been some advanced form of fighter that we've been working on for years, and, you know, people have just caught it being tested, so on and so forth. And it never even occurred to me, even though I was looking at an extraterrestrial vehicle, that, you know, this wasn't man-made.
When did you realize the craft was not of earthly origin?
Well, it probably really hit me when I got inside the craft and looked around and began to understand how the craft was operated, and finally grasped the whole project as a whole, as what we were doing, the fact that we weren't building this thing, we were trying to find out how it was made. We were back engineering it.
Now, as he said that whole spiel, his body was singing with him and he's accessing memory. This is the Mars Rover press conference, and we're going to focus in on really just the words and questions that would tell us anything. This happens to be Adam, and he was asked about the landing of the rover on Mars. We're going to watch his answer.
I'm being a little flip. In short, it looked extremely clean. We had...
Now he's accessing memory, and as he's talking, his body is singing with him.
Yeah. We touched down in conditions that were on the more benign side of our nominal
Still, his body is singing with him, and he's still accessing memory.
expectation. Our, by the way, I want to preface everything. This is preliminary data scooped with the sieve in the cacophony of the control room during the celebration, right? And largely by my good friend Miguel San Martin, who's somewhere out there, I hope. At any rate, very nominal, remarkably good. Our navigation error was
Still accessing memory. In short, they did land something on Mars, and he's accessing memory for it. Mars rover really is on Mars. Here they are just asked exactly to 5 decimal points where Curiosity landed. And we're going to watch this response.
Phyllosilicate trench.
I can't confirm that.
Can't confirm that. Body singing, and Buddy shrug it off. There's a reason why he shrug it off, and we're not seeing that yet, but I'm sure we will.
My estimate, I'm looking for somebody, yes. There's somebody in the audience here who has that in the tip of their noggin.
And judging by his eye tracking and his body movement, he really is looking for someone.
We should have soon that estimate, but I don't have it to 5 decimal places. We wouldn't report it to that because we're certain that we don't know it to that. And I don't know what the unmannedspaceflight.com estimate is.
Yeah, there's a team of people that are working on localization, including what information we got on the way down,
And his body is singing with him. So he didn't know it. He shrugged it off because he didn't know it. They don't report it to that. And his partner here is explaining why.
nav filter probably taking a picture at where, looking at the picture and trying to figure out from there where we are. I would imagine by tomorrow's press conferences, they should have a better idea where it came down, within a few hundred meters at least, hopefully.
And there you go. So he shrugged it off because they didn't have that information and they don't report it to that. That is his mentality on that subject. And considering, from what I understand, had been landed for a little over an hour and they're still gathering information. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this answered a lot of questions. And like I said before, we'll have to do more of these in order to cover everything. But if you liked it, leave a like. If you like the content, please subscribe. Thanks for watching.